That evening on The Late Show, something happened that had never been seen before on television. Stephen Colbert was in the middle of discussing family connections when a producer walked onto the stage with two elderly guests who would change everything. But what came next wasn't just an unexpected surprise. It was a devastating revelation about 81-year-old identical twins who had been separated at birth, about a lifetime of wondering if they had a sibling somewhere in the world, and about a DNA discovery that would finally answer questions that had haunted them for 8 decades. What you're about to witness isn't just about genetic miracles. It's about discovering that some bonds transcend time and distance, and that sometimes the most important meeting of your life happens when you're 81 years old. The moment that would reunite a family started with what should have been a routine segment about genealogy and family history. But when those two men walked onto Stephen's stage, everything changed. Because sometimes the universe decides that certain reunions can't wait for private moments. Stephen Colbert had been discussing the impact of modern DNA testing on family discoveries when his producer signaled that they had special guests who embodied exactly what he'd been talking about. The Ed Sullivan Theatre buzzed with anticipation as Stephen prepared to welcome what he thought would be a typical heartwarming story about family connections made possible by genetic science. "Ladies and gentlemen," Stephen announced, "we have two very special guests tonight who have an incredible story about the power of DNA testing to reunite families." Two elderly black men, both 81 years old and wearing nearly identical dark suits, walked slowly onto the stage with the assistance of producers. The audience immediately gasped at the striking resemblance between them. Same gray hair, same facial structure, same gentle expressions, even the same cautious way of walking. But their faces showed profound confusion and overwhelming sadness, as if they were still processing something incomprehensible. "I'd like you to meet Robert Washington and William Johnson," Stephen said, then paused as he looked more closely at his guests, noticing their emotional state. "And gentlemen, forgive me, but looking at you both, I can see this story has affected you deeply." Robert, adjusting his dark suit jacket nervously, looked at Stephen with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of 8 decades of questions. "Stephen, we're identical twins, and until 3 weeks ago, we didn't know the other existed." The studio fell completely silent. The weight of what Robert had just said, that these 81-year-old men had lived their entire lives not knowing they had an identical twin brother, was overwhelming for everyone present. 81 years, Stephen asked, his voice filled with amazement. "You've been alive for 81 years and never met." William, dressed in an equally formal dark suit, but with a slightly trembling voice, spoke up. "Stephen, we were separated at birth in 1943. Different families, different states, different last names. We've been wondering our whole lives if we had family out there, and now we find out we've been wondering about each other." Stephen sat down in his chair, clearly moved by what he was learning and by the visible emotional distress of his guests. "Gentlemen, I can see this discovery has been overwhelming for you both. How did you find each other?" Robert's answer revealed the modern miracle that had brought them together, but his voice was heavy with the pain of lost time. "My granddaughter convinced me to do one of those DNA tests for Christmas. She said, 'Grandpa, maybe you'll find some distant relatives.' I never expected to find my identical twin brother. When I got the results, I cried for 3 days straight." "And William, what was your experience?" "I did the same test around the same time, Stephen. When the results came back saying I had a genetic match that was 99.9% likely to be an identical twin, I thought it was a mistake. I'm 81 years old. How could I have a twin I'd never met? The shock almost put me in the hospital." The profound impact of this discovery was affecting everyone in the studio. The idea of living an entire lifetime wondering about family, only to discover at 81 that your identical twin was alive and searching for you too, was almost incomprehensible. "How did you make contact with each other?" William's voice broke as he remembered. "The DNA company put us in touch through email. Robert sent me the first message, and it just said, 'I think we might be brothers.' When I saw his photo, I had to call my daughter because I thought I was losing my mind. It was like looking at myself in a mirror. What was that first conversation like? Robert had to pause to collect himself before answering. We talked on the phone for 4 hours, Stephen. 4 hours of comparing everything, birthmarks, childhood memories we shouldn't have had since we were separated as infants, even the way we both developed the same nervous habits. But Stephen, it wasn't joyful at first. It was devastating. Why devastating? Because we realized everything we'd missed, Stephen, William said, his voice trembling. 81 Christmases apart, 81 birthdays celebrated alone when we should have been together. We both got married, had children, grandchildren, and the other wasn't there for any of it. Stephen was visibly moved by their pain. What did you discover about each other's lives during that conversation? That's what made it even more heartbreaking, Stephen, William continued. We both became teachers. We both married women named Mary. We both had 2 children. We both served in Vietnam in the same year. We lived almost identical lives for 81 years, but completely alone. The eerie similarities between their life paths was hitting everyone in the studio with profound impact, but also with the tragedy of parallel lives lived in separation. We both love jazz music, both play piano, both read the same authors, both have the same favorite foods. It's like we were living the same life in different places, always feeling like something was missing, but never knowing what, Robert added, his voice heavy with grief. Stephen stood up and walked closer to his guests, clearly affected by their emotional state. Gentlemen, what was it like when you first saw each other in person? William looked at his brother with profound sadness mixed with love. Stephen, I looked at him and saw not just myself, but I saw all the years we lost. I saw my brother as a child that I never got to play with, as a teenager I never got to talk to, as a young man I never got to stand beside at his wedding. Robert, what did that moment feel like for you? Robert had to wipe tears from his eyes before answering. Like coming home and like having my heart broken at the same time, Stephen. I looked at William and thought, there's my brother, the person I've been missing my whole life. But then I thought about all the times I needed him and he wasn't there, all the times he needed me and I wasn't there. The profound emotion of this reunion was overwhelming everyone in the audience, but it was tinged with the tragedy of 8 decades of separation. Have you learned anything about why you were separated? Robert nodded sadly, his formal suit somehow making him appear even more dignified in his grief. We were born to a 16-year-old unwed mother in Alabama in 1943. She was black, poor, and alone. Different families adopted us. My family moved to Detroit. William's family went to Chicago. Neither family knew there was a twin. The adoption agency kept it secret, which was common practice back then, especially for black Barbies. So your adoptive families never knew you were twins? Never, William confirmed, adjusting his suit jacket as if trying to maintain composure. My parents, Robert's parents, they all died never knowing they'd adopted only one half of a set. My mother used to tell me I seemed like I was always looking for something, always seeming lonely, even in a room full of people. Now I know why. Stephen was struggling with his own emotions as he watched these 2 men process decades of grief. What's it been like, getting to know each other these past 3 weeks? Painful and beautiful at the same time, Robert said. We talk every day, sometimes for hours. We're trying to catch up on 81 years of stories, 81 years of birthdays and holidays and milestones that we should have shared. But every story makes us realize how much we missed. William added, his voice breaking, we've discovered we both had the same recurring dream our whole lives. We both dreamed about having a brother, someone who looked just like us, someone who understood us completely. We thought it was just wishful thinking, but it was memory. Some part of us remembered being together before we were separated. You both had the same dream. The exact same dream, Stephen, Robert confirmed. We described it to each other in detail, and it was identical down to the smallest parts. We dreamed about playing together, about having someone who knew exactly what we were thinking without having to explain. It's like some part of our souls always knew we weren't complete. Stephen addressed the audience, his own voice emotional. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're seeing here is one of the most remarkable and heartbreaking reunions in human history. These two men have found each other after 81 years apart, and they're showing us that some bonds truly are unbreakable, even when they cause profound pain. He turned back to the twins. How do you process the grief of losing 81 years together? William's answer was immediate and devastating. You don't process it, Stephen, you carry it. Every day we talk, every new thing we learn about each other, we realize what we lost. We both buried our adoptive parents, and the other wasn't there to comfort or be comforted. We both celebrated our children's births alone when we should have been celebrating together. We both went through divorces, health scares, career struggles, all the major life events where you need family the most, and we didn't have each other, Robert added. We had good adoptive families, but there's something about having your identical twin, your genetic other half, that nothing else can replace. Stephen sat down again, clearly moved by their story. What would you say to your birth mother if you could speak to her now? Both men looked at each other before Robert spoke. We'd tell her we understand why she did what she did. A 16-year-old black girl in 1943, Alabama with twin Barbies, she probably thought she was giving us our best chance at life. And in some ways she did. We both had loving families, good educations, successful careers. But we'd also tell her, William continued, that we would have rather struggled together than succeeded apart. Some bonds are more important than circumstances. Have you been able to locate any information about her? She died in 1987, Robert said quietly. We found her grave last week. We visited together, the first time in 44 years that she had both her sons with her. The weight of that image, two 81-year-old men visiting their birth mother's grave together for the first time, was overwhelming for everyone in the studio. What was that experience like? We stood there and told her about our lives, William said, tears flowing freely now. We told her about our children, our grandchildren, our careers. We told her we forgave her for giving us up, but we also told her how much we missed each other. We left flowers, one bouquet from each of us. Stephen was openly emotional now. What do you want to do with the time you have left together? Robert's answer was immediate and touching. We want to make new memories, Stephen, but we also want to grieve the old ones properly. We can't get back the 81 years we lost, but we can honor them by finally acknowledging what we missed. We are planning to spend Christmas together for the first time in our lives, William added. Our children and grandchildren are going to meet their aunts, uncles, and cousins they never knew existed. We are going to have the family gatherings we should have been having for 8 decades. But we're also planning to visit all the places from our childhood that the other never saw, Robert continued. We want to see the houses we grew up in, meet the friends we had, visit the schools we attended. We want to understand how we became the same person despite living completely different lives. Stephen smiled through his tears. What would you say to other adopted children or people who wonder if they have family out there? Don't give up hope, but also prepare yourself for complicated emotions, Robert said firmly. I spent 81 years wondering if I had siblings, and I found my identical twin brother. But finding him also meant facing 81 years of grief that I didn't know I was carrying. William nodded in agreement. And to adopted children specifically, take those DNA tests, but understand that answers can be as painful as they are beautiful. We wasted 81 years not knowing each other existed, but we also have to live with the knowledge of what that cost us. What do you want people to understand about adoption and family separation? That it affects you even when you don't realize it, William said. I spent my whole life feeling incomplete, feeling like I was searching for something I couldn't name. Now I know I was searching for my brother. And that some wounds don't heal just because they're finally acknowledged, Robert added. Finding William is the best thing that ever happened to me. But it's also opened up 81 years of grief that I have to process now. Stephen stood between the two brothers. Gentlemen, this has been one of the most moving and honest interviews I've ever had the privilege of conducting. Is there anything you want to say to each other? Robert turned to face William directly, both men in their formal dark suits looking like mirror images of dignity and sorrow. William, I spent my whole life feeling like half a person, and now I feel whole but also heartbroken. I love you, brother, but I also grieve for us. I grieve for the children we were who needed each other, for the young men we were who could have supported each other, for all the versions of ourselves who lived alone when we should have been together. William reached over and took his brother's hand, both elderly men crying openly. Robert, you're the missing piece I've been looking for my entire life, but finding you also means accepting that we lost 81 years together. I love you more than I can express, and I also mourn for the life we should have had. We are too old to get back what we lost, but we're not too old to love each other now. The two 81-year-old men embraced on the late show stage, their identical frames in their dark suits, creating a powerful image of both reunion and loss. The audience rose in a spontaneous standing ovation that lasted several minutes, many people crying as they watched these brothers hold each other for perhaps the second or third time in their entire lives. Stephen wiped his own eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Washington and William Johnson, identical twin brothers who found each other after 81 years apart. This is what hope looks like, but it's also what loss looks like. This is what family love looks like, even when it comes with profound grief. This is what miracles look like, even when they're bittersweet.